Hello, friends in California. My guess is as you're joining me today, there are so many things in people's lives that are going on that are profound, that they are interfering with our ability to be our best selves. Right now, I'll be honest with you, you have fires that are, I'm sure, just weighing on your hearts. I have a brother who's in Portland. We are dealing with racial discrimination in our country that is literally tearing it apart. And we are all dealing with a pandemic that we have no idea when we're going to emerge from. And it is changing our lives, our educational system, how we interact with our families on a daily basis. All of these challenges can be lumped in to this idea of social and emotional challenges. We stand a 0% chance of being able to help our students learn anything this fall if we can't wrap our heads around these profound challenges. The world needs healing. We know that. So many things that I just brought up are just tearing our conscious apart, are tearing our interactions apart. We need to confront this. But this starts one person at a time. This starts one day at a time. And I firmly believe that if we start to have a person-first attitude in our classrooms, in our music classrooms, and to do so in a musical way, we're going to be able to get at some of this healing. And we know that we need to fill our own buckets first. So how can we heal ourselves? How can we heal with our students? One day at a time, one room at a time, one class at a time. Then we're going to be getting somewhere. Because this face is common. We've seen this face before the pandemic, and we see this face a lot now. The question that we need to ask as teachers is, can this person learn optimally? And if we look at neuroscience, the answer is no. Our brain, when we are encountering anxiety, when we are encountering stress, when we are encountering all of the challenges that I just mentioned, among many, many others, the answer is no. We need to address the social and emotional side of our lives before we can get back into doing what we all know how to do so well. Because we are all in a common ocean right now. The challenges that we are facing, we're all facing them together. Every single person in the world is encountering this pandemic. But whether it be because of resources, whether it be because of equity, whether it be because of our demographics, we are all experiencing this ocean in a different way. Some people are experiencing this ocean in a rowboat, and some people are experiencing this ocean in a yacht. And you better believe me, if you're in that rowboat, you're experiencing and feeling those waves so much more. So you say, what puts someone in a rowboat, or what puts someone in a yacht? Certainly issues with equity, certainly issues with resources, certainly issues. Some are in people's control, but many are out of people's control. One thing I would argue, though, that puts people in a yacht is prior social and emotional competence. That if you are encountering a challenge and you have skills set up so you can bring that skill set to the challenge ahead of time, you have a head start. You are going to be able to respond to these waves. You may know how to swim a little bit better, if put a different way. Because the challenges that were around pre-pandemic, they are just that much more profound now. If you don't have a home, how do you shelter in place? If food was a challenge ahead of the pandemic, oh wow, I can't even imagine the stress that basic human need would put. We know that levels of addiction, cyberbullying, and domestic violence are at an all-time high. And the unemployment rate right now, the socioeconomic structure of our country has been derailed. And all of this is weighing on the backs of our students, weighing on the back of us, weighing on the backs of the people that we encounter on a daily basis. And yet, Many of us try to go on and do what we've always done. Well, teach music. And we're going to get there because we still need to teach music. But we need to lead with as much empathy as is humanly possible so that we can help our students through these challenges. We need to help our students understand that we have basic human needs. And we as teachers need to take care of basic human needs before we can ever think about getting to meaningful instruction. Put another way, Maslow before Bloom. Basic human needs before higher order thinking. So here's Maslow's hierarchy. You know, that physiological needs down on the bottom. That's where we're living right now, folks. Are we getting that met? That many people aren't. Many people don't have air, water, food, shelter, sleep. Those are all huge. And if those aren't being met, you can't go to safety needs. But even if you got those met, safety needs, nobody's having those met, which means everything above that is an impossibility. So when we take the top part of Maslow's hierarchy and chop it off, well, Bloom's fits on top of that. So Maslow before Bloom. We are going to see students be off task this fall for a lot of different reasons. And one of the biggest reasons is because they're anxious. Even if you are in person and it's safe and you're socially distanced and you're wearing masks and you're masking the instruments and XYZ, right? That looks nothing like what our students are used to schools and their music classrooms looking like. That's going to cause anxiety. If we are at home doing music like this, that's different. That's going to cause anxiety. You know, this says teacher expects too much, but folks, the world is expecting too much of us right now. And when we start to wrap our heads around that, we need to temper our expectations for our classroom, not lower our standards, but restructure them to understand what we need to be doing to meet our students' needs now, because they're not the same students that you had 6 months ago. The world has changed them. The world has changed us. We are fundamentally different because of the challenges that we've encountered. But we need to make sure that they're not bored, because especially if we're doing this, well, every day looks the same now, right? I get up, make my coffee, and here we go again, right? Another day in paradise. I love my life. I love what we're doing, but it's monotonous. We don't have a lot of the stimulation that we used to have. We used to be able to go out and do things. Well, that gave us variety in life. We don't have that right now. This says teacher expects too little. I just think that we need to understand exactly where to hit our students so that they're not bored and they're not anxious. Now, if we look at this from an ed psych standpoint, we'd be using Vygotsky and his zone of proximal development. Well, that zone of proximal development, which used to be right about here, just got really, really skinny. And we needed to fire that arrow of instruction, right in the middle there, where we're balancing the rigor that the students need to not be bored with not going the other direction and making them anxious. We're going to see a lot of that off-task behaviors for a lot of different reasons. But our role this fall is to figure it out. As hard as this is going to be, we cannot get frustrated. The behaviors make sense. The behaviors are a response to a stimulus that our students that we have never had to face before. The behavior makes sense. So the question on the front of our brains needs to be why. Why is the behavior happening? And when we start to ask the question of why, then we can get to a place of approaching with empathy, of approaching a place of I want to help. And I can do this in a musical way. Cheryl is a dear friend and a teacher just in our backyard here in Chicagoland. She had this to say: I will try not to confuse their cry for help as a bad choice. We're going to see a lot of bad choices and we're going to see a lot of cries for help. Our students need us, but we cannot confuse these two, not this fall especially. We need to lead our students from trauma to trust through music. We've been taught the last 6 months to not trust. Oh, you're within 6 feet of me. You don't have a mask. Get away. I don't trust you. Okay, right? I can't be but with my friends. I can't do what I usually do in a trusting relationship. Well, that's going to take some healing, and that's going to take some instruction. We need to teach ourselves and our students to go from trauma to trust. And I know we can do this in a musical way. Enter social and emotional learning. So SEL has been around since 1994. That's when we first named this. So from 1994 to 2020, more than 25 years, we've been sniffing at it. It's developed a robust research base. It's been embedded into policy at all levels. But then you know what? Something happened. The pandemic happened, and we got a huge magnifying glass over SEL that said, hey, this thing's important. We can use this thing. And you know what? I appreciate that. But there's something that's happening right now because of that. It's become a buzzword. My guess is you've heard the term SEL more in the last 6 months than you've ever heard in your life. And there's a reason for that, as I just mentioned. But that buzzwordiness, you know what? We've learned how to use SEL in a musical way in a non-pandemic setting, which we are adapting for our time now. But SEL is not going anywhere, folks. It's going to be here long after the pandemic leaves us. Maurice Elias was one of the founding fathers of SEL, and he's starting to notice. The SEL folks, non-music, non-arts, are starting to notice what we're doing in music and the arts. And he had this to say: I believe everyone will soon come to realize that our arts educators are the secret weapon to implementation of social and emotional learning in our schools. They're getting it for a lot of different reasons. They're getting it, that our ground is fertile to be able to do social and emotional instruction. And a lot of people come to me and say, Scott, it sounds a lot like stuff that we already do. And I would agree. I would agree that we are starting just to sniff at the possibilities, that we're looking at ways to capitalize on music being social and music being emotional. But I hope as we start to unpack exactly what SEL is, that we realize that it can be so much more when done purposefully, when done intentionally and embedded into music. So it never feels like it is music, 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 music. Stop. SEL time. Music, 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 music. It should be music and SEL. And when done well, it should just feel like exceptional music teaching. At its really simplest, social and emotional learning allows us to respond to challenges instead of react, to respond to the waves instead of reacting to them. Social media is the perfect example of reaction. Those aren't responses, those are reactions. Very rarely do we have a calculated, thoughtful response. It's a reaction. That's why so many people say, don't read the comments, right? Because they're reactions. And then we react emotionally to that. We are not responding. Social and emotional learning is, at its simplest, preventative mental health care. It is proactive to challenges. So how does that position us as music teachers? I like to think of it as a sandwich, okay? So we're the bottom bun. This is where we can build some fundamental skills. We can build the skills for the students to be socially and emotionally healthy. We can start with that. But then the sandwich, which is our kiddos' lives, goes on top of that. And that sandwich is full of successes, full of trauma, full of challenges. The second that we get deep into that sandwich, we need another population to be the top bun. And that top bun are our mental health professionals. Those are the folks who we need now more than ever. We need our social workers. We need our school counselors. We need our psychologists. Because the second that we get into trauma and we need someone to react, that's when we need them. We need to understand which bun we are. And we are really good at the bottom bun. We're really good at skill building. We do that in music probably better than any other curricular area. We need to capitalize on that. But we also need to understand that we need to stay on the bottom bun and not cross through that delicious hamburger to the top bun. Because we are not counselors. We should never be asked to be counselors, even though the students come to us and expect us to be counselors. This is not our job. This is not what is professionally safe, especially now as trauma and challenges are getting more and more profound. Here's your 40,000-foot view definition of SEL. I'll give you a second just to scan this, please. So 3 words are highlighted in red. Skills, the process of acquiring skills. It's skill-based. So just how we build musical skills, just how we build those musical skills in our classroom, we can build SEL skills. What happens when you practice something? It gets better. What happens when you don't practice something? It gets worse. Same things with SEL, right? If we are working on our self-awareness or our social awareness, it gets better. If we neglect it, other way. Unifying. This isn't about bullying. This isn't about don't do drugs. This isn't about responsible relationships. It's about all those and many, many more. It's a huge umbrella that once we learn these skills, we can apply to any of those challenges. And it's happening in schools. SEL's for everybody. Every single person on this call, myself, my wife, my family, my parents, everybody can benefit from SEL. And 80% of us fit into what's called universal prevention. The place for SEL is our music classroom. It is not the one-on-one interaction that I think a lot of people think is SEL. Well, yeah, I sit down with Johnny and talk about them when they're having a bad day. That's my SEL. Folks, that's good humaning. That's good teaching. That is good adult to adolescent or child interaction. SEL is for the whole class. SEL is skill building in a way that's building these competencies for everybody. And 80%, that's going to be enough. Once we get out of that 80%, we have 15% and 5%. The 15% and the 5% are towards the top part of that hamburger and going to go to the top bun, okay? So the 80%, bottom bun, top 20%, top bun. There are 5 key components of SEL, which I'm going to briefly go through, but I'm going to simplify it to 3 in just a second. So the first one is self-awareness. Am I self-aware? By saying that, am I able to have a robust emotional vocabulary? Can I tell you how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that way? Okay? So if I were to go into someone's classroom and say, you know, how are you doing? Here are the answers. Good, bad, fine, hungry, tired. Hungry, tired aren't emotions. They're physical states. That leaves me with good, bad, fine. Not enough. Not enough. We need to have a more robust emotional vocabulary so that we can tackle and really own where we are. When we do that and we can say, I am feeling this way because of this, I'm starting to achieve self-awareness. Social awareness. Folks, this is where we are as a country right now. Social awareness is understanding and appreciating diversity. It's being aware of social norms and values. And above all, it is fostering the skill of empathy. More attention here than ever before. And we'll talk about how do we do it in a musical way in just a second. Responsible decision making. This is the finish line of SEL, folks. People say, you know, what do you want me to do when I do SEL? Well, in the end, I want us to make good decisions, responsible decisions, responsive decisions instead of reactionary decisions. Self-management hinges with self-awareness. Self-management is this idea of having a pause button, that when my emotions get extreme, in either an up emotion or a down emotion, and that's how I categorize those, not good or bad emotions, but up emotions and down emotions. Self-management, whenever I have an extreme emotion, then I can press pause. Can I press pause before I send that email that probably should wait till tomorrow when my emotions de-escalate, before I say something that I'm going to regret, before I punch the wall or punch another person? Self-management is the pause button. But we do this in music classrooms. It's called anything that we've ever done. A concert, a production, working on a piece of music, being ready to go in the circle with boom whackers on time, goal setting, plus time management. Can I have a goal and have a set amount of time? Concert, 6 weeks, go. In the circle, boom whackers, 60 seconds, go. Goal setting, time management. Now, I know every single example I just gave does not account for remote learning, but I still think we can foster the skill of self-management and having high expectations that we have goal setting plus time management. Now, we're going to talk about this a lot in just a little bit, but goal setting doesn't have to be our goals. The students need to take ownership and set their own goals and then hold themselves accountable for a timeline, which they can set too. And then relationship management. This is the one-on-one. This is how are we getting along with our significant other, our students, our colleagues, our children, relationship management. So those were 5 things. Too many for us to remember right now. I'll clean it up to 3. Self, others, decisions. That's as clean as I can make SEL. We take self-awareness and self-management and put it into self. We take social awareness and relationship management and put it into others. And then we leave decisions for its own. This is sequential. And this is where a lot of people, I don't want to say get in trouble, but skip steps. That they say, you know, my kids are making bad decisions. Let's do SEL. Great. Fantastic. But we need to start with self. This is why we are having so much trouble as a country having dialogues around racial inequality and so many other challenging things that we're having right now. Climate crisis right now. We are all approaching this with this idea of others, that I need to talk with others. Yes, we do. And we do need to make good decisions. And now I get all of that. But we're skipping this essential part that we need to know what we are bringing to the table. We need to foster self-awareness and self-management so that when we do talk with each other, it's productive. And then we are making good decisions that are a response instead of reaction. So if we were live right now, I would ask you to unmute and we would have a nice little fun dialogue. But I have a couple pictures that we're going to look at in just a second. They're from a photo shoot a few years ago. And I want you to tell me how I'm feeling here. Oh, really? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great. Of course. So 3 clicks later, right? Photo shoot. This is what was captured. How am I feeling here? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Take a look at the difference. What do you think? Are they big physical changes or small physical changes? Teeny, right? But huge emotional ramifications, right? This fall, we need to be so aware of what our face is telling our students. Because whether it be like this or whether it be like this, our face, and I'm not saying that it always needs to be like this, but our face is going to be giving away so much of what's in our heart. And if we can be expressive and understanding, we are going to be able to navigate boredom a little bit better, but also have a more meaningful musical experience. Otherwise, every part of the music that we're going to be doing is going to look like this, and chances are our students are going to look like this. This needs to be the gateway to our soul. So in 2015, fantastic movie came out, Inside Out. They did their homework, folks. There are 5 core emotions that live inside all of us, and they are joy, anger, sadness, disgust, and fear. What I love about this movie is that in the beginning, I wasn't really a big fan of it because joy was the hero, which I get. We all want to be happy, but all of the other 4 emotions were kind of villainized, saying, sadness, get away. Anger, calm down. Disgust, chill. Fear, come on, just buck up. But you know what that tells me? That it's not okay to be angry, that it's not okay to be disgusted, that it's not okay to be sad, or it's not okay to be afraid. And we should always only strive for joy. And that's not okay. That's not okay. What I love about the movie is in the end, sadness is the one that saves the day. Sadness is the one that comes out and is validated above all. because when I talk about self-awareness and self-management, every behavior and emotion makes sense, needs to be honored, needs to be appreciated. Because now more than ever, folks, there are times to be angry. There are times to be sad. There are times to be afraid. And there are times to be disgusted. Now, how we respond to those emotions, that's self-management. But we need to validate that it is okay to feel all of these. Now, there are critiques of SEL, and I want to pause before we delve any deeper and just tell you what they are. So one of the biggest critiques that I hear now is, Scott, my plate is so full. How do you expect me to add anything else? I get it. I get it, folks. But as I said, if it ever feels like SEL is one more thing, then we're not doing it purposefully enough. And we're not capitalizing on the power of music. It takes a little bit of planning on the front end, but it should never feel like it is distracting from the music. It should be enhancing the music and connecting our students at a deeper level into the music. The other critique that I want to bring up, and we cannot ignore this now, ever, but especially now, is that social and emotional learning, when not being culturally responsive, when not being culturally relevant for our students, can serve as a lever for control, can serve as another form of policing our students, especially our Black and brown students. We need to approach social and emotional learning as a lever for anti-racism. If we were to say, oh, self-management, oh, come on, why are you afraid? Why are you disgusted? No, control, manage that emotion. Folks, that's not what SEL is. SEL is saying, I need to help us all come to the table with the tools to amplify our voices, to be anti-racist, to be able to have discussions around privilege, and to have discussions around ways that we can productively amplify our voices to get through this and give diversity, equity, and inclusion a huge booster shot. And when we do that, social and emotional learning can be our path forward. And what we're calling this now is transformative SEL, TSEL. And this is going to be a new wave that we're going to see emerging here very, very soon that embraces this need for SEL to be culturally responsive. The good news is it works. We see academic improvement. In my research, we see musical improvement. And that's not just always the performance, the product. It is often the process too, the buy-in, the energy. All of that comes along at a greater level. And it does increase the social and emotional competence of the students, and often the teacher too. Mr. Rogers is a personal hero of mine, and he had this to say: confronting our feelings and giving them appropriate expression always takes strength, not weakness. It takes strength to talk about our feelings and to reach out for help and comfort when we need it. This is what's at the heart of what we all need to confront right now. We need to have the strength and courage to engage our students in some of these very, very difficult discussions, and to have the strength and courage to want to help our students build the skills that are going to help them encounter the tests of life. Racism especially was on the heart of Mr. Rogers. In 1969, Francois Clemens, Officer Clemens, was on the show, and Mr. Rogers said, you know what? We need to take a stance on racism. But I'm not going to do it by a dialogue. I'm not going to do it and come out and say racism is wrong. How am I going to do it? I'm going to do it by action, and I'm going to do it through art, his TV show. He did it by putting his feet into a kiddie pool with a black man. A powerful, powerful statement for Mr. Rogers saying racism is wrong. But there's another story that goes along with this. And to this day, Francois Clemens holds it heavily in his heart. Officer Clemens is also a gay man, and Mr. Rogers was not willing to address that part of his humanity in this action. He was not willing to say that Francois Clemens was a gay man. In 1969, he was worried about the ramifications of addressing homosexuality within his TV show. Racism, yes. Homosexuality, no. This is a testament that even for Mr. Rogers, that we are all on a personal journey to discover what our biases are, to discover our blind spots, and to reach out and understand what we need to do so we can truly embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion through social awareness. So, what I think most people are interested right now is understanding how does it meld with music education. I had the privilege of interviewing composer Alex Shapiro, another West Coast person, and she had this to say. What we are doing by teaching social and emotional learning in music is giving these students a portal. It's a portal inward towards their heart and a portal outward to the world around them. That's exactly right. And when we were talking with Alex, she puts it into her music. She tackles these on the front end. The work has been done by many, many composers. It is just our job to capitalize on it. I've had the privilege of writing a few books that start to look at translating social and emotional learning, which my guess is, I know it's coming from California policy, but my guess is your districts are too. And these two books are my attempt to help translate that. The first book, Music Education and Social and Emotional Learning, really looks at this construct and says, how do they meld together, and delves deeply into many of the activities. The student workbook takes those activities and puts them into a tangible reflection. Now that we're in some kind of remote learning, putting these up on an LMS, that workbook would be a good resource for something like that. So take a look at this chart. This chart is something that the SEL folks have developed that looks at how can we do SEL in all settings. But I see music here. Action and reflection. Now we know that the pandemic has said action's coming down. If we're going to balance this scale, when action comes down, what's reflection need to do? You got it. But let's look at action. Contribute. I think we can still get at that in our current setting. Practice, sure. Maybe not as important as what it used to be. Choice, yes. But how often do we actually give our kiddos choice? Encounter. We can still give them opportunities to encounter things. But tinker. This is something that I think we need to do this fall more than ever. How often do we give our students just the opportunity to play, to improvise without a chord progression, just to go? You know, I was a beginning band director for many, many years, and I noticed that something happened, that when the first day that I gave students their instruments, the first day of the first year that they played, and I put the instruments down in front of them, their eyes got shiny and they got so excited, and I taught them how to open up the case, and then they started to go for the instrument because they just wanted to make sounds right. And I said, no, 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 stop, 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 stop. And what happened to their eyes? They weren't shiny anymore. Now, I know that the instruments need to stay safe. I get that. But I think we need to embrace tinkering longer. Allow them the opportunity to just play. Play is the language of youth, and we need to do that in a musical way too. So, understanding that action is going to come down a little bit, reflection has to go up. How often do we have our students describe, evaluate? Can they evaluate not just, how did this go as a group, but can they self-assess? That is central to SEL, self-assessment. Can they connect to other things? Can they integrate different worlds that they're encountering right now? But I think my favorite is envision. Can they dream with us? Can they dream about the future of music education, what they want the future of music education to be? Let them come along on this journey and forge forward. So here's some activities to get at this. So remember I said self, others, decisions, three main goals of SEL. There's going to be three standards that we're going to talk about, and we are going to use the SEL standards from Illinois. I know California has their own. The reason we use Illinois is because that's where SEL was kind of born, and many of the state standards are derived from the Illinois standards. They're the most robust. They're the most grounded in CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So we're going to use the Illinois standards for these activities. So 3 sets of activities coming up: self, others, decisions, starting with self so that we can then progress to others. Standard 1, develop self-awareness and self-management skills to achieve school and life success. So I want you to take a look at these skill sets. You know, standards are great, but for me, as a teacher, when I start to think of standards, I think, okay, so that's something that I need to put on a lesson plan so I can check that box off. But folks, this is what I want students to learn. This is what we want our students to be able to do after goal 1 work. So recognizing strengths and needs, identifying and recognizing emotions, self-efficacy, impulse control, emotional de-escalation. It all starts with identifying and recognizing emotions. And emojis are the emotional language of youth. I love emojis. And some people say, Scott, really? Yeah. Someone once told me that in education, we need to meet our kids where they are and take them to where we want them to go. Well, there's some things that are a little wrong with that. We'll talk about that in just a second. But yes, we need to meet them where they are. And emotionally, where are they? Often emojis. If we start to get them to use emojis, then we're going to be able to start this dialogue. So this could be as simple as, how are you doing today? Okay, great. Or it could be starting to meld into music. Well, when you look at this piece of music, what emotion do you feel? When you're practicing this piece of music, what emotion do you feel? What is your response to when you listen to a piece of music? Emojis are a great way to start to break this ice. This practice journal, it's probably a little bit too much for what we're encountering right now, but these questions are central to reflection. And please remember that if people are saying, Scott, you know, what's the first step? What's the first step if I really want to start to integrate SEL into my classroom? Reflection should go with every single activity, every single process, every single product. Start to get your students to reflect. And there are 2 things that are in almost all of these questions. So what I would recommend is pick 1 or 2 that really resonate with you and use it as an exit ticket. Use it as something that students can do Friday and then come back to every week to start to revisit. There's 2 themes here. 1 is goal setting. Can the students set their own goals? The answer is yes, they can, and yes, they need to. And the other piece is self-assessment. Can the students measure their progress on their goals? When we're doing that, we're teaching them to be independent musicians, but even more than that, we're teaching them to be resilient. We're teaching them to recognize short-term and long-term goals. How do we fight through when we encounter difficulty? All of those things come from this type of work. Identifying emotions in music is probably the lowest lying fruit when we talk about SEL. So any piece of music can be divided into elements. Take any piece of music you're working on, whether it be high school symphony orchestra or whether it be 2nd grade general music, and you can divide it into rhythm, tonality, tempo, tension and release, text if applicable. Once we divide that and the students are able to take a lead on that, 1, think about the musical benefits alone. They're able to start to then articulate what parts of the music might be challenging, what parts of the music might be easy for them, and then to be able to say, what do you need to practice? If we do that, we're going to be able to get to a place well beyond the students practicing what they can already do well, because we know that happens, right? For each of these elements, then, could the students attach an emoji or an emotion if they're able to get past the emoji? If we can do that, then we're starting to able to look at the layers of music and how does it have emotional connection. If you were looking at the journal and you said, Scott, I really, really like that, but it's too much. Okay, great. I simplified it for you. Can the students simply just articulate a goal and measure how they are coming along on that goal? So it could be a personal growth goal. It could be a musical growth goal. And then color in the arrow up until a point of achievement. Now, This isn't something that you do once. You have to do this regularly so we can track progress and trends. If you send your kiddos off and say, please come up with your own musical goal, are you going to be happy with what they come up with? Absolutely not. Why not? Because they're not used to doing it. They need practice doing it. So what I recommend is maybe give them 4 that you've come up with and still give them choice, but then give them a spot to write their own. And eventually we can get to something like this where the students really are just bringing their own goals, but starting with choice and then writing their own for voice to be able to give them a space to have that voice. Absolutely a good starting place. Anxiety right now is at an all-time high. I used to talk about this in terms of taking the stage and having butterflies in your stomach, performance anxiety, right? Well, we know that there is a relationship between preparation and anxiety. And it is that the more prepared we are, the less anxious we are. Or the less prepared we are, the more anxious we are. This is something that we can have in our daily lives now. That there are many, many things that are making people anxious. You know, whenever we enter the school building again, there is going to be a very, very high level of anxiety. And the teachers that I've talked to who have already done this say that there is an eerie silence from the students, that the students are anxious and don't want to talk. They don't want to participate. So if you're in person, there's going to be anxiety. There's anxiety here. Oftentimes, folks, that's why the cameras are off. It's not because they don't want to engage. It's because this is anxious for them. There are ways that we can prepare to get beyond that. Now, we talk about performance anxiety in a different way, but I'll use the analogy of going to the grocery store. You know, if I have my mask, if I have my wipe, if I'm prepared for going into the store and understanding that the store has their precautions in place, well, then I'm prepared and my anxiety is less. If I go into a store that doesn't have precautions in place and I see someone without a mask, my anxiety is going to go up, right? Preparation and anxiety. So we give composers a ton of power, and that power is often derived from the title. Well, what if we didn't tell them the title? Next time you do a piece of music, a new piece of music, and if it's oral, okay, if you're just playing a recording or you're just performing it yourself, don't tell them the title. If you're going to give them a piece of music, write it out. Let the students have a role in naming a piece of music. What's the first impression of the piece? Emotional elements. Emojis could be used. What plot could this piece tell? And then possible titles. The second that a student names something, they own it. There is buy-in, there is interest, and the students are then going to be able to work on it with more fidelity. My music. I would say that this is probably the most popular activity out of anything that I've come up with. And this is all about the students coming up with their soundtrack. What are 3 pieces of music that represent you? And it could be from different chapters of your life, or it could be one piece from now. You know, one of my favorite things to do right now when I'm working with teachers is asking them as sort of an icebreaker, what's your pandemic theme song? And we get a lot of laughs, but it also lets me a little bit of insight into what they're bringing to the table. Then for this project, we can have some kind of audio visual component. So whether it be for our little students, just holding up something that means a lot to them, or for our older students, it could be a keynote presentation playing in the back, or a PowerPoint, or a movie that they've created. It could be really high tech, or it could be as simple as just getting up, having a piece of music playing, and telling us a story. We tell a story that we want to share, that we want other people to know. Vulnerability is part of this, but only as vulnerable as each storyteller wants to be. So we're allowing, that sounds like way too strong of a word, I'm sorry. We are providing space for students to bring their music into our classrooms and to share their life stories. Remember that I said that the main reason that we're failing right now is because we're not understanding our identity coming into these discussions? Absolutely. A driver's license is all about our identity. So this driver's license could be a way that you could start to engage your students in becoming self-aware about who they are. Now, this is a version that I came up with in 2017. There's many things on here that I would change, but I kept it this way to show that we're all on a journey. I firmly believe that, especially once we reach a certain age with our students, that pronouns should be a place to have a discussion. And there's a tricky thing here. We don't want to make students, pressure our students to tell us pronouns, but simply by saying my pronouns are, we're giving them a space to understand that. Religion, race, ethnicity. Talk to us about your family members. Then give us a space to understand what your musical life looks like outside of my classroom. So important to be culturally responsive and culturally relevant to say, what are you bringing to me? And then I'm going to tell you kind of what I want to bring to you. And let's see how those things fold together. The driver's license is a place to start this. So that's self. Moving on to others. Social awareness and relationship management. Use social awareness and interpersonal skills to establish and maintain positive relationships. Here's this skill set. I'll give you a second to scan these because these are so important, folks. Multicultural awareness, negotiating refusal, conflict management, building relationship, social engagement, perspective taking, resolving conflict respectfully, empathy. That's where it's at, folks. Empathy. So, Harry Potter fan here, full disclosure. One thing that J.K. Rowling did beautifully was this idea of houses. Now, the hat picked them. We're going to have to be the sorting hat. But at the gist of it was it brought people from so many diverse backgrounds to work together for a cause and to have an identity. In school, we divide people. We divide people by instrument, by gender, by age, by voice part, right? All of those things are divisive. Well, what can we do to bring people together, to work on projects, to work on products in a way and with people that maybe they're not used to working with? So I'll use the example of composition because we all want to put composition into our classroom in a more meaningful way, right? But we don't always know how to. And we know that group work is either really, really great or really, really terrible. And when it's really, really terrible, it's because one person does all the work and resents everybody else for just coming along for the ride, right? And everyone else is like, woohoo, right? Free day. Well, that's because we didn't set them up for success. We took a project, we plopped it down and said, go. Group work will fail when we do that. But what if we gave everybody a role? What if we're composition, right? Student A does the rhythm. Student B takes that rhythm, slides the notes up and down to create melody. Student 3C adds the articulation, and student D adds the dynamics. Every student had a role to be able to have the product be successful. Now, then we rotate. So everyone has a chance to do rhythm, melody, articulation, dynamics. But it is essential that everyone complete their job for the group to be successful. This is why the house system and group work is going to be so essential this fall, because we need to develop more opportunities for students to work together. The teacher to student model never really worked, but now even more so, the students need to interact with each other. They are craving social interaction. Who's leading and who's following? You know what? Leadership in music education is a huge, and rightfully so, topic. Some fabulous people leading the cause. There is something that I think we're missing, though, and that there's an F word associated with leadership, and it's follower. But you know what? I love followers because I firmly believe that the best leaders are the best followers. They are empathetic to the leader. They're able to support the leader. And by being an empathetic follower, you are understanding what type of leader you want to be. Kindergartners can be taught to be the most fabulous leaders. They can also be taught to be the most supportive followers. We need to guide our students and set up infrastructure in our classroom to have as many leaders as possible. And when you're not serving as a leader, you're serving as a follower. Loud and clear, folks. Music education needs to get beyond dead white guys. That's it. You know, I thought I did this well. And then I looked at my last 5 years of programs at the Lake Forest College Wind Ensemble, and guess what? I didn't do it well. I thought I did, but I wasn't being purposeful, and I failed. That's changing. We need to put music in front of our students by composers that don't look like me. We need to put music in front of our students by composers that look and have the voice of our students. If we're going to create the next generation of people who are going to support music, not necessarily be professional musicians, that's not what we're after. We're after having lifelong relationships with music. We need to provide musical role models, and those role models need to look like our students. More female composers, more composers of color. And when we do that, we are starting to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in music education. Music for social justice. Along with that, so many powerful pieces of music started as theme songs from movements. Well, let's put our students on scavenger hunts. We just lost John Lewis, right? He was famous for saying, the civil rights movement without music would have been like a bird without wings. This project is the bird and the wings. Can the students go and find this music that is the theme song for something they are passionate about, and then start to unpack who wrote the piece? What was the social issue? What events surrounded this? To learn about how music can push forward movements. We're teaching our students to understand what is in their hearts, what is social justice, but then also understand the essential role that music can play in that. Mission statements are going to be crucial this fall. You know, classroom rules, I love that they're collaborative, but they do necessitate punishment. And we know that punishment gets short-term gains, not long-term. Missions serve as a moral compass to move us forward. So I think this fall, we should all start by asking our students, what are your group values? What do you value about this class? What do we value collectively, individually? And then from those group values, start to develop a mission statement. That mission statement should be no more than 3 sentences. And that is going to be our guide, that when people get off track, when we lose motivation, when we suffer from anxiety or boredom, this is our grounding stone that says this is what we believe in. And then service. Our plates are full, folks. We need to give students responsibility and meaningful responsibility, not just because of service, but when students have meaningful buy-in and ownership, you know that things will go better. And if we can do it from a selfless perspective, where we are serving the program and each other, we are going to get so much further. Here's a nice little chart to get students to reflect upon what service matters. You're going to have to answer the question, what service is available, especially now, the limitations of this. But I think that we can have meaningful service where students feel and know that they're contributing in a truly meaningful way. Selfless ease. Every phone has a camera now, right? Let's put them to good use. I think part of our job is to teach our students how to use social media responsibly. Selfies are all about me. Selflessies are all about finding good in the world. Can your students go out and use those cameras to capture good, to capture people overcoming struggle, to find examples of music in their community where we maybe have lost music? This is all about selflessies. And then maybe you can curate them as part of a class Instagram account, or they can share them with you and you can make a bulletin board. But selflessies, a critical element to, one, teaching them how to use technology responsibly, but 2, to get our students to think in a slightly different way. Less about me, more about we. Decisions. We've taken care of goal 1. Goal 2. Here's goal 3, folks. Demonstrate decision-making skills and responsible behaviors in personal, school, and community contexts. So you can scan these, a lot of words, but it really comes down to 3 things. Situation analysis. Can I analyze the situation and say, this is what's going to be challenging? Can I, as the person encountering challenge, generate alternative solutions? When I only have one option, I'm reacting. When I have multiple options, I have a choice. I have a decision, and then I can respond. So our job as teachers is to help our students come up with alternative solutions and then anticipate predict the consequences. And consequences are not always negative. So, situation analysis, generating alternative solutions, and anticipating the consequences. It looks like this, folks. Now, it doesn't always need to be something that is social or personal. It can be musical. We're in a class and we have a musical challenge. We've hit a roadblock. Well, you know what? I don't know what we're going to do. I'm out of ideas. What do you have, class? And then we start to hear how they think we can fix some of these challenges. Solution A, solution B. Well, this might happen. This might happen. Well, let's pick one and try it. Okay, what's the worst thing that'll happen? It didn't work. Okay, nothing that I tried worked either. Let's give it a shot. Did it work? Then next steps. Best case scenario, we fixed it and the students have ownership. Worst case scenario, we try something else. America the Beautiful is a deceptively tricky little song. Dotted quarter notes, every student can do those well, right? Right? Dotted half notes, okay, a little bit easier. An octave followed by an accidental, sixth followed by returning to the key signature, multiple leaps to end this puppy, it's tricky. So, if I were to put this in front of students, how many of these do you think the students would be able to circle? And you say, Scott, we do this. It's called what we do before we sight read a piece, right? The STAR system, I got it. But here's how we make it SEL. Have the students become very aware of what they can solve on their own and what they're going to need your help for. If they can do that, then they're identifying their strengths and needs and asking for help, a SEL skill in and of itself. So the next time that you pass out a new piece of music, have them scan the piece and say, what are you going to be able to do yourself? Okay, don't circle the whole piece. But more importantly, what are you going to need my help with? Equal and opposite reaction. I love cliffhangers. I love when we have a story and then it stops. And then I have to rack my brain to think about how it's going to end. A couple examples. Beethoven was a great composer. He went completely deaf by age 53. I know it's debatable. What happened next? Tony and Maria from West Side Story are from different rival races. They fall in love. What happens next? Giving our students the opportunity to predict endings is the first step to getting them to make responsible decisions. Let's do it in a compositional way. Here's Twinkle Twinkle. It doesn't need to be Twinkle or something like this. It could be a 8-bar phrase from a piece of music that you're doing, but go ahead and delete some of the measures and have the students fill in the composition that's going to change the meaning. For Twinkle, did you create a supernova? Did you create a shooting star or a falling star? We're getting at a compositional thing, but we're also allowing them to write the story and to figure out how their choices change the piece of music. Whenever we have group decision-making, there are 4 guiding principles. Everybody listens. The second one I need to change. Everybody can share. Not everyone has to share, but everyone can share. No interrupting and respect. That no interrupting thing, teachers especially, we can't interrupt our students. Advocacy, so important now. We're living in a world where we have to advocate for music education. Well, we can do that well, or we can have our students do that, but we need to teach them how. A lot of this comes from that mission statement exercise, but can we ask them what music means to them? What's a job interview, folks? It's advocating for yourself, right? If we do it in this capacity, then our students are learning how to advocate for themselves, how to advocate for music education, how to advocate for our programs. Best case scenario, we're building that skill. Worst case scenario, we may need them. And if we're teaching our students to articulate what they believe in, you know Mama Bear and Papa Bear aren't going to be far behind. This fall, this is my 20th year teaching, folks. And for the first time, I can honestly say I didn't start my first day with a huge smile on my face. There was a huge cloud. And I figured out why. It's because I was so down about figuring out what we can't do. Can't do concerts. Can't be in the same room with my students. But once I finished my pity party and stopped focusing on what I couldn't do, I started to think about what can I do now? And when I started to think about that, the barn door opened, optimism emerged, and I started to dream. And I started to recreate some of the great things that we can do in our classrooms. And it all centered around voice and choice. What can I do to provide a space that doesn't silence my students' voices? And what can I do to always give them choice so that there's buy-in, so that there's ownership? Let's face it, folks. Up until now, performance has been in a larger font size. We've done our job so well that many people are looking at us and saying, "Oh, you can't do concerts. Why do we need music education?" Okay, well, we've done our job too well. Performance is going to be in a lower font size now. Creation, response, connection, and to do so through self, others, decision-making, social and emotional learning. The barn door is open. It is time for us to adapt our instruction because this fall, now more than ever, we need to acknowledge our students' needs before the notes. We have a Facebook page. Almost 3,000 teachers across the country have jumped on board. So please, if something that I've said resonated, click a like, click a follow, and this is where I'm putting all of our new resources, and there's going to be many, many coming out. We have a brand new video podcast with some phenomenal music educators where I interview them, teaching social and emotional learning through music. Some of the greatest composers alive now have joined me already. Some of the greatest educational leaders in music education have joined me already. And we're starting to connect these dots so that you can see how social and emotional learning in music education can be combined. So many resources are coming out around SEL from NAFME, from Arts Ed New Jersey, from Castle, Edutopia, which is George Lucas's educational foundation. Sorry, I'm going to go back here. The one on the right, I do want to talk a little bit about this one. selarts.org. It came out in New Jersey, but if you haven't checked it out yet and you're interested in doing this, I'd highly encourage you to go to selarts.org. It's a fantastic website where they crosswalked the National Core Arts Standards with the SEL standards. So if you want to know what creation looks like with self-awareness, you click on the square and it takes you there and it shows you tangible examples of what it can look like in the arts. It's the gold standard, folks. Check it out. So this is our little guy. His name's Nathan. He's going to be 4. Can't believe it. He's going to be 4 in just a couple weeks. So the other day, my wife and I were playing with Nathan on the floor, and he had his blocks out, and it was time for dinner. And we looked at him. We said, "Okay, Nathan, time to pack on up, clean up your mess." And he looked up and he said, "No, I'm too busy playing." And we looked at him and we said, and clean it up. And he did. But afterwards, I started to think a little bit more about that, and I was like, you know what? He's got it right. You know, our kids play instruments, but we got to go to work. This isn't right. And I think this is one of the reasons why I had trouble starting this school year. I want to harness my inner Nathan. I want to find as many opportunities this fall to look at people and say, "Sorry, no, I'm too busy playing." Because when we do that, we have joy. When we do that, we have the opportunity to harness what is in our hearts. We can be too busy playing this fall too. The relevant question is not if an arts practice will affect a social and emotional competency, but how it will happen and what arts educators can do to improve the odds that the impact is positive. Thank you very much.